So continuing on with all these 2021 reviews, I wanted to go ahead and hit on another device that I'm really in love with. The Pixel lineup in general was probably one of my favorite lineups from any device, but specifically the Google Pixel 3a was one of those phones that we didn't really know we needed. Now, it came out in 2019 in May, so mid-year through the year. It also came out with the Pixel 3a XL, and I really like these devices. They were the cheaper versions of, their more expensive models, and they eventually continued it on with the Pixel 4a and the 4a 5G, but I'm really happy about the Pixel 3a lineup, and for sure I'll definitely tell you, not only am I going to link this device in the description, I'll probably link a couple other ones that I'd probably recommend this year as well. You can get them from the links down below and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside, it really wasn't a controversial device by any means, even though it didn't have like a crazy great build quality or high refresh rate or anything like that. Google wasn't selling this thing for like $1,000. It was a sub $500 phone, and that was something that was really, really huge. I mean, that was a really big asset for this device. It had a 5.6-inch OLED display on the front, and what's funny was that this thing actually looked better than the Pixel 3 lineup in my opinion, and it was cheaper, so that didn't really make too much sense at the time. And it's a 1080p panel, and it's an OLED screen, and for whatever that, I think it was like $300 something when this thing came out. I mean, that is a really, really good and competitive price tag to pay for a device like this, because it's not like some crazy bad panel. Like, this was a really good panel when it came out. It only had a little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, but even more than that, it actually had a USB Type-C port and a headphone jack on this device as well. As most of you may know, when Google was making these type of devices, at the time their Pixel lineup didn't have any headphone jacks anymore, but this device actually had that capability, which again, that in and of itself is another huge asset for it in my opinion. It did have, not a crazy great build quality, but it didn't really matter because the price tag wasn't super bad. It had that polycarbonate on the back, a little bit of like a glossy finish up top, and it really looked like, a Pixel device at the time. And even now with the Pixel 5, like, all these phones kind of look still the same, which is pretty cool. And it had that fingerprint sensor on the back as well. And definitely on the outside, if this thing was priced as like $800, it's definitely not an $800 phone by any means, but it's a pretty well built, I would say, sub a $400 phone for sure. So in terms of the outside, still a huge asset. And I think the camera was one of those things that was also a pretty big deal about this device, because it shared pretty much the same camera as their main Pixel device of that time, and it had the same software improvements as well. So those were some huge assets. It had that single 12.2 megapixel sensor on the back. It had optical image stabilization, which was great. And I think at the end of the day, again, this was one of the better assets for this specific device. Now, it's not necessarily, like I said before, the craziest, greatest camera in this day and age, but like I said, the software improvements that this phone had were some crazy good ones for sure. And at the end of the day, this is still a really decent camera. It wouldn't necessarily be the first camera I would pick up, and there's a couple of different reasons, at least two main reasons. The one being, it cannot do 4K at 60 on the front or the back, so only 4K at 30 on the back and only 1080p at 30 on the front. In this day and age, I mean, we are literally past that like crazy. We are like 4K at 60 at the minimum nowadays. So the fact that this can only do 4K at 30 on the back is a pretty big difference in my opinion. I think the front camera though is still pretty decent, but as stated, it would be better if this thing kind of topped it off with something a little bit better. And I think the second thing is probably the lack of, extra sensors on the back. Had this thing had like a telephoto or ultra wide sensor, that would have made this thing so much better, but unfortunately, it's not really the case. So in terms of the camera setup in 2021, I'll probably tell you, I think it's a pretty good camera setup still. I'd probably rate it like an 8 out of 10 when you consider the price tag. Actually, I'll say like a 7.2 out of 10 when you consider the price tag and everything. Like I said, it's not like the best camera ever made, but for the price tag that when this thing first came out, it's pretty decent in my opinion. But I still think probably one of the best things about the Google Pixel 3a and why I would highly recommend picking it up in 2021 would be the software life cycle of this device. So this thing, if you guys don't know, Google Pixel 3a, this is a phone that was teamed up and pretty much made by Google, and whenever a new version of Android comes out, the Pixel 3a, the Pixel lineup in general, are tend to be the first ones to get it, mostly because these are stock Android. It doesn't have like a crazy amount of things going on in the background, and this is a really clean version of Android. There's no bloatware for the most part, just some stock Google apps, and this is a great experience for a device. Whenever you get a device like this that's stock, you tend to have a really good experience with it. Now, even though this thing came out in 2019, it's probably going to be getting the same software updates as the Pixel 3. So we're probably going to get another version of Android, and then that may be it. But I'm not even freaking out about it too much, because this device has such an easy capability of not only getting the next version of Android, so Android 12, fairly easily. Day when it comes out in a beta form, this thing's going to support it, and that's going to be like in the next couple of months, I think. But on top of that, another humongous thing is this thing has such a huge custom ROM capability. It's just so insane that a phone like this can be sold at the price tag and have this much capability and still be kind of underground. Like, not that many people use this phone anymore, which is so sad. But the software behind this phone is still one of the best things about it. And because the software is great and it's, optimized for this device, with its 3,000 mAh battery, it still is actually pretty decent, battery life. It's definitely not like the best thing ever, but it definitely isn't horrible. Like, you can easily get a day out of this thing because the software is optimized for this battery. Now, if you throw a custom ROM on it, it may be a little bit of a different story, because some ROMs aren't really super stable unless you get a super stable ROM, like an Android 10 ROM or maybe some more Android 11 ROMs at this point. If you download an Android 12 ROM once it first comes out, if you download an Android 12 ROM as soon as that thing comes out, it's probably not going to be the most stable version. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, the custom ROM capability behind this device is still one of the biggest assets for sure. So this is probably one of the main reasons why I would highly recommend a Google Pixel 3a in 2021. Now, moving on to the last part that I want to hit on, which is the performance. This thing had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 670 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 615 GPU, and 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now, those specs may sound like not that great of a phone anymore, but like I said before, this thing did technically, come out in 2019. It did have that watered down 670 chipset, so it didn't have that 8 series at the time, but still totally okay for the most part. And the fact that it only had 4 gigs of RAM isn't really that big of a deal, because the Pixel 3 and 3 XL had 4 gigs of RAM too, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. And what I can tell you about the performances is that because this device, again, the software is optimized for this hardware, it's really not that bad of an experience, and it shouldn't be, because it's not even 2 years old anymore. Even though it's rocking a chipset that isn't the latest and greatest, it still has a really decent performance inside of it. So whenever I would do anything, using the UI, because the UI is stock and everything, there's not a lot of stuff in the background. So whenever I open an app and all that good stuff, it really, day-to-day tasks are going to be fine with this thing, just like how they're going to be fine on really any other device. If you're just texting people, going on TikTok, Snapchat, all that stuff, you're going to be perfectly fine on this type of phone. But even taking it up to a notch and going up to something like, Real Racing 3 or doing heavier intensive gaming, this device is probably going to be able to handle it for the most part, but it's not going to be like the craziest, best performance. It's going to be a great performing device for sure, but if you're expecting something like, this device is going to be able to just blow your socks off and everything, you may not get it from this specific device, I'll be completely honest. But I do think at the end of the day, the performance from this device is still top tier. And if you're trying to pick up a phone in 2021 and you want something that's stock and has a long longevity and has pretty decent software and performance inside of it for a cheap price tag, this device is probably going to be perfectly fine for you. So in terms of that pretty much covers up the performance segment. And to kind of sum up the video and to answer the question, should you go and buy a Google Pixel 3a in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you. Let me just list off some pros for this device, because there's not a lot of cons, to be honest. The screen of this thing is still pretty beautiful. It still has a pretty timeless display. It's not going to look super outdated by any means, so that's a pretty big advantage. You still have the headphone jack and USB Type-C port on this thing, which is great. You have the fingerprint sensor on the back, a pretty decent camera on the back, a okay camera on the front, very good software. The stock software is going to end probably in the next year or two. It's still going to get security updates, but the custom ROM capability behind this device is out there. Like, it's so crazy that it's still another huge pro for this device. And the performance is still really good as well for the most part. But this phone isn't perfect, like I stated. It does kind of lack some of the cool features that we're kind of getting in this day and age. No 120 Hz or 90 Hz on the display, no fingerprint sensor in the display, no expandable storage, which is okay, but this thing only comes in one storage variant, which is 64 gigs. So some people may not like that. The back camera can only do 4K at 30, and the front camera can only do 1080p at 30. So you're not getting crazy great resolutions in terms of the video capability, but the photo capability is still pretty good. So keep that in mind. It's not negatives. The battery life is good, but in this day and age, we do have bigger size batteries. So that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind. You're kind of missing out on some RAM improvements we've gotten in the last couple of years, and you do have, a little bit of a watered down chipset. But even with those cons, I still think this device is still a really good device to pick up in 2021. Again, it wouldn't be like the first device I would recommend. I think a phone like a Galaxy S10 would be something I would recommend, probably even more than this. But for the price of this device, for the availability, you could just pick it up on eBay or Amazon. Like, this is a really good phone. And if you currently own a Pixel 3a, I would recommend keeping it for as long as you can. If you want to pick up another phone, then go for it. But this device by far is a really, really good device for sure, still in 2021. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly, everything else. I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.